All right. Hello and welcome back. This is Colin Keeley here.
And I'm Brent Sanders.
We are two guys buying and building wonderful internet companies.
Yeah, and so we've decided to make an episode this week about a sensitive subject. It's something that we're noticing is happening in the space, but really just a fact of life when doing business, which is lawsuits, right? Legal issues. And we just want to dedicate to kind of talk about stuff that's going on in the space, but also just recent stuff that we've run into. I mean, I guess not recent, but just kind of looking back in the last, I don't know, a couple of years of legal doing micro SaaS acquisitions.
Yeah. I don't know which one you want to start with. I mean, we've dealt with random things in the past. I think the most interesting, somewhat recent thing is SureSwift, an acquirer of software companies, not that dissimilar from us, basically sued and effectively killed Calm Capital, which is another, I mean, they acquire minority portions of mostly software companies. And it sounded like a frivolous lawsuit, and they pushed it so far that Calm is effectively shutting down, which is quite a bummer. I love their thesis, and I think they've done it in a really good way. And it's just wild that a lawsuit could basically kill this promising company.
Yeah, and from what I understand, you probably know more than I do, but the scenario here, and also for like scope purposes, we're not talking about like civil lawsuits. It's just like sort of business back and forth lawsuits, things that partners breaking up, and in this case, I think that was the scenario. They partnered on something, and then just to be clear, the Calm Fund, like the existing investments, are still going on and still being aided. So it's not shutting down. It's just not making any future acquisitions at this time. Is that right?
Yeah. So background here, SureSwift and Calm put on this like founder summit series, so like a conference series for software founders. It seemed to be going pretty well. I think the situation was the SureSwift founders left, and like the LPs took over, are in charge now. And I think they wanted to break off the series and continue it with they're now the big band software guys. So like just
Right.
another competing firm. And SureSwift apparently is like, we don't like that idea. We're just going to sue you. And they just continued the suit. Then it became apparently such a distraction and such a drain on resources that Calm couldn't raise future rounds of funding because it's scaring off LPs. Yet I have Tyler talks about it a bunch. I could talk through like what he learned or what he said he learned and what he would have done differently. But yeah, it's a wild situation with a small fund can effectively be killed by a lawsuit, whether it's justified or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true of any business, at least at this scale, right? Of like smaller, less capitalized businesses that a couple $1 million can wipe you out. I mean, so I want to preface this conversation with something that I learned very early in my career around legal situations, which is suing somebody is just a game of seeing who's got more money. That's my like general approach to anything legal related when it comes to threats or litigation. It's like, let's fuck around and see who's got more money, who's willing to pay more. And like, it's essentially a measure of that, which is messed up, right? If you think about what's fair, what's right, but I put like business law almost less so. Fairness is relative, and it does come at a cost where, you might be right, but you don't have the legal resources to defend yourself. And so that's the way that in the beginning of my career, I've thought about. I've had situations as a service provider or whatever where litigation has presented itself. And I always just am like, okay, if I'm the big fish, then sure, I want to threaten and do all those things. But if I'm clearly, it's just good money after bad is the way I look at it, unless you're the bigger fish. And frankly, I've never been in that case where it's like, okay, I don't mind dropping a couple $100,000 to make ruin someone's day. I just don't have that value, and or I don't place a value on it. At least I haven't been mad enough to. So, anyways, that I just want to say like that. I'm going to keep saying that over and over. Let's fuck around and see who has more money is generally the theme here, which sounds like the case with SureSwift. And by the way, when a bunch of LPs took over the company, is that the operations of the company essentially? Is that what you're saying around SureSwift?
I don't want to speak for them, but yeah, my understanding is the whole executive team left, started a new private equity fund, and the old fund is still operating, which it's a holding company. So there's a number of companies beneath it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all new people running the thing over there.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a funny thing. It's like trying to your operators and then you're going to try to sue investors. It's like, obviously, by the nature, they're going to have more cash or a larger disposition. So an uphill battle to start. So anyways, going back to the story, they put on, they essentially partner. I guess that's sort of the first mistake, is they decide to partner and everything's going well. And then these partners of SureSwift, the operating side, leave. And then like, what went wrong? Like, obviously people are aggrieved because their executive team left, but like, why go after Colin?
So I think they actually went after Calm and some of the founders of SureSwift that
Okay.
left. And I think the plan was for the founders who left and Calm for them to continue this conference series. But SureSwift was getting cut out of it, which is, I mean, it's like a tiny product line. It's definitely not core to your private equity business. But yet they were saying they were being harmed because they're stealing this conference away from them. But yeah, Tyler writes everything publicly on Twitter and in his like newsletter and stuff. And he was saying when this was happening and he published a lawsuit and everything, and it just kept continuing. You'd think the shame of it on SureSwift's side, like the damage to your reputation amongst founders, would be painful enough that you wouldn't pursue this. But they just kept pursuing it and kept burying Calm under like legal fees to the point where it was just like, hey, we got to throw in the towel. It doesn't make sense to do this anymore.
It's a bummer, but it makes sense, right? It's like, if you go through this process and you need to provide your Slack, history, you need to provide your email. These things get subpoenaed, right? Is my understanding of the process, and the things that start happening is, and it gets very serious, because it's like, now you aren't, if you can't furnish that stuff, I have no idea what happens, but I'd assume you essentially lose the battle, you essentially give up. But yeah, I mean, you're going to know, or you're going to need to retain very expensive $3 to $5 to $800 an hour people working multiple days on your behalf. And it's like, again, if you're balancing this with LP money, it's super irresponsible, which I think it's the conclusion he came to. It's like, look, I can't burn investor money. They didn't give me money to pay attorneys, right? You've got to end things. Do you know what's your understanding of like, what is their claim? I mean, because it sounds like SureSwift was saying, this is our proprietary deal flow, right? We put on this event in partnership with you, and you cut us out, and that's like how you're basically cutting off our top of funnel, and everyone's leaving and leaving us with a bag, and it feels like it's essentially the top of funnel. But is the thinking, I would assume the thinking on their end is like, hey, let's just, one, we're hurt, and being hurt emotionally, depending on who's on the other end, that can only go so far. Again, depending on who's on the other end, because that can go really far with some people, which I think we'll talk about a little bit more in this episode. But yeah, it just seems, it is a bummer. That being said, it's like, if they have the sort of war chest, and if you think about it from their perspective, they've got MRR coming in. They're doing, if I'm understanding correctly, SureSwift does just sort of like, they have the holding company, they do mailbox money, they're sending money out every quarter to their investors. And if they're going to take some of that and essentially bury competitors, in the long term, that proprietary deal flow in their head will come back to them, right? I think I'm trying to think of it from their perspective of like, okay, well, if I burn their ships 3 to 5 years from now, the next few deals will start coming back to me, or back towards SureSwift, which, like, I don't know anything about their business. I don't know if they're doing future acquisitions or deploying capital with the shakeup, but that might be their thinking, and say, hey, well, we've got cash flow coming in greater than Calm, and we can divert some of it for a period of a year or 3 and get rid of competitors. Maybe
Yeah.
is their thinking.
I mean, I think whether it's justified in any way or not, I mean, you could just pursue litigation if you want to make this other person's life hell, which it seems
Yeah.
like maybe this is just spiteful to some extent. Very effective, but yeah, it doesn't have to be like a real reason. You could still bury someone in legal fees. But Tyler's takeaways here was, he says he needs to at least raise bigger funds, have separate revenue streams, or do the same work with a really small or cheap team. So he was saying he wished he started this as more of a side business, and then he had like core income streams from like M&A advisory or something, or brokering sales of these companies that he wasn't buying minority stakes in, or consulting or something like that. Yeah, he basically decided raising these small funds was just not worth it. It like was just too fragile of a business.
Is he talking about this? And again, I don't know a ton about the structure. I know the overall thesis, and it's really cool. But from a fund perspective, what did he raise upfront capital? And if so, how much?
You'll probably find it. I want to say the first one was maybe only a few million, and then maybe it
Okay.
got into the like a little over 10 million or something like that. I
Yeah.
think he had a few separate funds done. But yeah, I
So
was
like,
buying minority stakes in companies, mostly software companies.
so the way that I'm reading this, and I'm probably doing poor math depending on how it goes, but it's like what that means to me from an average Joe, like to convert it to what does that mean for him month over month? It's like there's not a lot of cash for him. There's cash coming in that's carry or whatever that's going to pay admin costs and accounting and all the junk. And I'm assuming very little of that's going to come back to him. And then how does he get paid? Like this is what I'm hearing from you is like it's tough right now for cash flow, and unless you have something ancillary that's driving cash flow, like how do you pay your mortgage? And for literally you're managing this, let's say $10 million for a round number. You're managing $10 million where it's already been deployed, and it's like who's taking care of him? It's a very like fragile boat, so to speak. It's and so then if you come upon rough waters, you're sunk. So it does seem like that's like the takeaway I'm getting, which is like he's probably struggling. I don't know personally, like I don't know him, I don't know his background, but it sounds like there's just scraps left over, and of that, it's like, hey, this isn't worth it. Like I can't wait for the outcomes of all these investments. I've got to be able to pay my bills day to day.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. He didn't take that route, or at least he didn't say that publicly. It's definitely possible. So publicly, they have 20 million roughly in
Okay,
total assets under management. So 2% of that is like 400,000, which disappears really fast because there's like fairly significant carrying costs of doing all the legal work on multiple different funds, a bunch of small funds too.
right. Right. I mean, and if it sounds like he's very interested in if you're doing an event, like that's coming out of pocket, right? That's part of there's expenses there. There's even just like if he's doing a regular meet and greets and traveling, like 400 grand, I would take half of that out immediately for junk, right? Of like, hey, because of the number of companies. And then it's maybe he's being able to pocket some of that for his time, but it sounds like I mean that's like 1 month's legal fees in a slow paced active legal case, right? So it's like you immediately go to zero, and then you start looking at okay, I'm going to be racking up debt for this scenario. So it's the more that I'm hearing about this, understanding the numbers a bit more, and we're guessing, right? Like we don't know shit. We know what he says on Twitter, but like I'm trying to put myself in his shoes and then his investor's shoes and the pressure that he might be getting of like, hey, all of this is going to go away because it's all going towards there's just not enough cushion for legal battles, which by the way, nobody plans on advance. If I said, oh, I need to go to investors, say I needed to actually I have to raise 100 million and I'm going to deploy 10 of it. I'm going to keep the rest around in case of legal issues, they would run, right? They'd be like, what are you planning? What are you expecting? So, I mean, the more I think about this, the more I see the sure swift angle of like they know these facts and you can make a competitor just go away if you're willing to burn that cash. And if think about it, for them, it might be worth, hey, if we get one deal that we didn't or two deals that we didn't, all of this is well worth it. And if you have a spiteful person, they also can spike the football and say that might feel good to them. But this might make sense is the kind of scary thing that I'm realizing as we're talking through this. Is like there might be a world where this is actually a good strategy.
Yeah, I mean, like Calm is not really competitive with us. I guess I would say I send them stuff periodically because people reach out to me and they want to do a minority deal. Like they need one check to get going, and then they're off to the races. And that's not what we do. We do majority deals. So I send them. So I don't know if it's competitive. The spin outs where all the executives left and raised like a $200 million fund and definitely taking significant deal flow away. Like going after them would probably make more sense. But
Yeah.
then they're backed by like billionaire family offices. So it's a little harder, harder target to
So
attack.
would you characterize this as of like the schoolyard fight? There's like two big bullies or two big kids that are fighting. I'm not going to call anybody the bully because they're all, I don't know enough about it, but there's two big kids. And then one of the big kids turns around and hauls off and knocks out one of the smaller kids.
The little kid.
Yeah. It's like, why would you do that? It's just, so what you're saying in this community, it's like, why would, that looks weird. That looks super off putting. And then will this impact their, like, really, really think about this? Like, will this impact future deals for them of like reputation? Do founders actually care about reputation? I would say yes. Like, I think for the, especially the, in my mind, the better deals, the ones that are like bootstrap founders that have really built something great and they really care, they're going to go and dig. And I do feel like that's going to matter. But maybe I'm thinking more of on a micro scale. Maybe they're thinking like, hey, we're buying big companies that it's no bootstrapping going on here. This is like, they're buying big boy businesses, not bootstrap businesses.
Yeah. I mean, I would say basically every deal we've won, I'm not sure we were the highest offer. Like we were easy to deal with and they liked us
Yeah.
and they felt like we were a good home for their business. So I would say it matters far more. Like in venture capital, there's a lot of bad actors and they keep continuing, they keep winning deals because maybe it doesn't matter quite as much. But yeah, you would think this gets flushed out, but maybe it just never does. It's not public enough. You Google, the names, they don't show up as negative things. And it just, people pay attention to their own lives. They don't care that much about this stuff.
Yeah.
I would think of the reputational damage as being problematic, but maybe it's not. I don't know. I guess we'll see over the years whether this continues or whether it is run their companies they already own and they don't really buy any more acquisitions.
Yeah. I mean, I could easily see somebody who's just of a slightly different generation not putting any stock in, like, oh, they're going to complain about me on Twitter. Like, who gives a fuck? Like,
Yeah.
they're going to do it anyways, right? It's like, and I'm not sure. I mean, I got some gray hair. I'm not sure where I fit in on that. Sometimes I'm like the crazy stuff that goes on there. Anybody can actually take anything with a grain of truth there. So I don't know. Interesting scenario. It sucks. I guess like that's my one reaction to this is like that. It's really unfortunate to see this. Always scares me in like the patent troll world where it's like somebody's just going to come after you and ruin your day and they're really well equipped for it and you're not. And it's just going to, it's like extortion essentially. So it feels semi close to that in some respects. But then again, I don't know really the details about the actual merits of the case. Like you're getting it from one perspective who's being very public and then the other side's like hush hush. That does seem like a strange imbalance.
Yeah. My takeaway too is it's like, what can we learn from this? And then it's just a bummer overall. It feels like there's more demand for this kind of one and done check than ever. But yeah, it's unfortunate. Hopefully he comes back in some form or another, maybe under a different legal entity and just restarts it. But
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that would be interesting to talk about is here are deals that we've looked at in the past that have like legal potential and running for the hills when that even like comes up. We had one very large deal that we were heading towards close. I won't get into the exact details, but like ran into something that was essentially like, oh, you can get the seller was saying that's not going to be a problem. You actually talk to the other party and they're like, this is going to be a problem and you can either
yeah,
do this or you can sue us. And they're like, oh, you'll win, don't worry. Like, and it's like the fact that we're talking about legal issues in an acquisition, it's like, no, we're not. No, no. Our investors do not pay us to pay attorneys, which I think is, I for the most part, everyone, unless you're like a law firm that has a acquisition arm on it and you want to bill hours and you're going to do that for free, like great. But like, just think it is something, it's toxic, right? It's like toxic waste. You run for the hills.
yeah. And there's kind of one bar. If it's your own money, do you want? And then if you're bringing investor money into it, like the level for risk has to be way lower. And any
Yeah.
like legal risk or like something looks a little funky on the business, you just walk away. Yeah, for sure.
Before we move on, I think it would be, does Tyler talk about like how this impacts his like personal mental state? Because that there has to be a fair amount of interference there.
I mean, you could read it between the lines in his writing that he's not
Yeah.
super happy about it, but not really to a large extent. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's got to not be fun. Basically, a year of dealing with stuff that's not productive in any way.
Not productive and there's like this risk of with certain lawsuits, especially business, it's like you look at damages, you look at this could take everything from you, right? It could take if it could take his portfolio. I don't know in this case, but if I was him, I'd be thinking about because I'm a sicko, this is all gonna get taken away. So there's like this mental resilience that you'd have to like have and maintain and build around I'm going to be okay. Like for me to keep working, I have to know what I'm doing is going to come to fruition. Otherwise, why would I be doing this? So there's going to be this like, what's it all for thing. That's almost like, I'm just trying to like look at a lawsuit as a weapon, and there's like a mental drain, but also almost like a dangerous thing that can happen there depending on who you are, right? Like I, I'd like to think I'm stable, but if put in these situations, it may make you want to just throw your hands up and say, forget it. I can't deal with this. This isn't, it's affecting the person itself. I, I've spoken with a few people that just like, they won't even go down that route. They're just like, you know what? I'll just walk away from it. I'd rather just walk away from it than have it affect my health, have it affect, I mean, this stuff does, if you're engaged in your work at this level, like it's going to have a reflection on you personally. I don't care how tough you are.
Yeah. Yeah, not fun. I don't know how you protect yourself. I obviously you raise bigger funds as an idea, so you have the capital. Otherwise, I think you just legally separate everything as much as you can. So hopefully, I mean, imagine this is like multiple different funds. I don't know what fund signed on for this conference or what legal entity signed on for the conference, but that should be the only one that could be sued, I imagine. And so I would think that the other investments are all safe and it's just
Yeah.
attacking this one entity that's related to the conference, or maybe it's the holding company at the top, which would be like, don't sign contracts with that,
Yeah.
legal
Don't
entity.
sign contracts. Exactly. So, and I think a lot of that stuff, like in extenuating circumstances, a court may say, hey, we're going to go up to this is, it's got, I'm sure it has to reach some bar of like, hey, there's been enough malfeasance where you clearly set up a shell company to do these. Like, there's no value in that company. We're going to go after the thing that actually has value, and being able to do that, it's interesting. You see that with like, I don't know, like the Sackler family with the Purdue Pharma stuff. It's like, oh, well, you can't come after us. That's our business. And then like, no, this is bad enough that we're going to go after you. But yeah, I don't know. I think about this as, in terms of defenses, I think about this as like, is there an element of keeping your dealings, like not trying to keep it real all the time? I guess that might be the one way I would think about this, is like, sometimes you have to realize, I don't want to say karma because it makes me sound crazy, but like you're trying to work things out. And sometimes when you start these conversations, it's real easy to be like either silent, I'm not going to respond to that person, and this is just going to blow over, or I'm not going to address, I'm not going to like nip this thing in the bud. And that may take a little bit of like pride crushing up front. And at least cases that I've seen this go too far, it's tends to start that way. It's a little bit of like, fuck you. And then the letters start going, and then the filings start going, and it's like, oh shit, this is escalating. Had we kept talking, like it wouldn't have gone there. Right. And so that, in terms of defense, and again, like if somebody's coming after you for something, there are definitely areas that this defense would never work. Right. It's like something has already happened. It's in the past. Can we work through it? Can we find a settlement? And it's, when you've done nothing, why would you settle? Right. But it's like, I just try to always make sure everybody feels like they're winning or is trying to win, or it's like we're all walking away from a deal or a situation as like successful, even if it's a shitty situation. Right. So I think there is an element of like working in good faith that is the defense that I put a lot of trust in, but I also like that only goes so far. So I guess that's like maybe more of an operating principle than a what to do if you get sued. I think if you're getting sued, it's already gone too far.
Yeah, I think that helps. My other one would just be like, I mean, this is a simple partnership for a pretty meaningless business and it torpedoed the whole main thing. So I would think
Yeah.
of being very careful with partnerships and who you're doing that with and like try to do everything in-house as much as you can. Be careful with service providers. Like don't do any unnecessary deals if you don't have to. Because it just like broadens your exposure potentially. Your surface area for attack just increased with everyone.
Speaking of which, like I think that's a really, really good point. I think going on the like who you partner with is an important one, but also like who you hire, right? We hire software engineers. Like I've hired tons and tons of engineers for tons of different projects. I was having the revelation, or like about a year ago, we were working on Scout and just trying to find the right developer. It's a weird code base and it's hard to find the right people. It's like, it is so dangerous, even using checks and balances and controls. Like it is so dangerous to bring developers or just people into your business, right? They get keys to things. And a lot of the time, my approach for hiring, especially when I don't have an existing bench, to build a bench is like, I'll hire 5 people with the intention of only continuing with 1 or 2, like graduating people up, because I find tech interviews are hard, and you just got to work through that week by week. But, you know, I've added a ton of controls around, okay, I'm going to give this person access. I mean, I've had so many sleepless nights knowing like this developer has access to this database, and if they wanted to be malicious, I just think that is the area that I'm, double, tripling down on, like security protocols around people having access to things, data, staging data. It's like, we're not a big company that has HIPAA compliance or a lot of data compliance requirements, but I get that, like, we need to have that, as well as like supply chain, like knowing all the code that they're pushing through. So as security is constantly in this world of software companies, it's just getting more and more, the amplitude of everything is just ramping up. Like there's just so much more every single day in terms of risk. And so like, I feel like that's one major risk that I never really, I thought, oh, we've got cash, we can hire people to help us. It's like, yeah, but there's, if it doesn't work out with them, are they going to be aggrieved about something? Do they going to have access to something? And so just locking down those controls has been more important than I feel like ever, of like, and giving me a lot of pause as to inviting anybody in the trust tree, so to speak.
I did this at Jules recently, the Latin America recruiting company. So initially we were really small and everyone had access to everything. And then we kept hiring more and more recruiters. And if like one of them was malicious, they could have taken our whole customer list, taken everything, or like really damaged our sensitive systems.
Yeah.
So a couple months I went through and like I definitely made sure people didn't have access to things they didn't need access to. So locking down sensitive systems, like the new recruiters can't touch our CRM. They don't know who our existing customers. They only know who they are like looking at hiring now or helping out on
Mm,
hiring. Yeah, limiting, credit card or money access to just the people that need it for sure.
yeah. Yeah. I guess it's just like one thing I never really, in the startup world or in like the small scale starting from zero, there's not much to protect, right? But being in this realm of like, hey, this is a business that has 10 years of transactions in the database, or passwords that are encrypted, but they get access to the key. It's like when developers come in, or even just service providers, they get access to sort of things, or you get proximity towards things. And especially with development, where it's like, hey, there's this issue happening on production. You need access to production. You need access to these things. Otherwise, you can't do it on staging, or you can't do it in a development environment. It's posed interesting challenges, which I think we've been able to rise to, but it's just extra headache. But that is for sure something that I feel like keeps me up at night. Is like, who has access to things, it's less so them. It's like, who has access to them, right? Who has access to their machine in their house? Like, I don't know, if they felt like if their machine was compromised and they had access to a system, would that person just decide to download the database and do something with it? It's just, you see these breaches all the time, and they aren't usually like a direct correlation to, oh, you hired this person, they got mad and then they did something. It's like that person had poor passwords on their machine, and it's all the same on every system. And it's like, it's hard to enforce those things.
For sure. Do you want to talk about our past ransom situation?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So we had a product that essentially had data that was on S3, like an S3 bucket, and that key got leaked through a development environment. This was a long time ago, but it got leaked through a development environment, and they were able to get access to one specific bucket and write to it, and which means like, with the keys that they found on another tier, those keys still worked on another tier. And so this is a common thing, and I'm going to get a little technical, but with Amazon, a lot of people that aren't super savvy with it, like, will just try to get it to work, right? It's like, just put the keys in, especially for development environments that have access to like all the buckets. And there's a way to say, hey, I want access to this, to be able to read, write, and do all these things, but only this bucket. And when you're in development, you're like, I don't know, just give it to everything. So it was a development bucket or development credential, but it had access to more buckets than it should have. So this essentially got found, and over a period of time, somebody went in and took all the data, removed it, and put a file there and said, hey, email us if you want your files back within this amount of time. You got to send us Bitcoin. And we're like, oh shit, we didn't really know what the data was that was in there. And we're scrambling. So I found this, I was scrambling to understand. It wasn't even impacting anything. It was something that we were doing a routine check and found this. And so that was the first. And I know people who've had their actual like systems, like their machines bricked. Essentially, you log in to your computer and it's blue and it's like, hey, you're not getting access to any of your data. And so it's a common thing. This is the story essentially goes, reached out to the person. Again, I don't really remember what was in there. And when I was going through that, I'm like, I don't know if I need this data or I don't. I'm
It's a
going to
subset of
assume,
customers too. It's not like all customers or something were
right.
impacted.
Yeah. It was like a subset of customer data. And I was like, I don't know. This is like, and nobody's emailing me being like, hey, my data's not there or something is not working or I wasn't exactly clear if it was code or something that we use like assets in emails, something along those lines. So I just assume we need it and we should have it. So went through that process and it was hilarious in a couple of ways. So I'm going to cut to the end, but I'll then tell the story. But at the end, like I realized I didn't need this data. So once I got the data back, I'm like, oh shit, like this isn't really important. Nobody needs it. And it's like, didn't affect any customers, didn't affect any outages, didn't affect anything. So it was stupid in the end to go through this, but we went through it and it was biggest regret was paying the ransom. So this story is intended to help. If you're in this situation, I'm going to tell you why not to pay the ransom. So I email this guy. I assume it's a guy. I assume he's in Russia based on or like an Eastern European country of some sort, just based on his written English. So he wants Bitcoin, which like I don't have Bitcoin on hand, especially our company didn't have Bitcoin on hand. So I'm not going to pay it personally. So we essentially say, hey, we are intending to pay it. We want these files restored. So they use like a database or like a file backup system. They send you like, here's essentially the files, but in order, they've been encrypted in order to basically decrypt them and restore them. Here's how you can do it. And so we need to get a key and they give you a time limit. And so the scramble was really like, how do I even get money to them? Because everything I tried was like, oh, this is going to take 2 days, 4 days. You have to do KYC. Like I'm going through my personal Coinbase to try to figure out like, how can I move money to this wallet? So we eventually get them paid and then we start the transfer and we have like 5 gigabytes, 10 gigabytes of data and it's moving at like 10K per second. I'm like, hey, like this isn't going to work. Like, where are your servers? Like I can spin up a server to transfer this, but like, it's like, oh, you need to pay for premium transfer. And then that was the point on which, oh, fuck, this is not going to be worth it. So I won't go through all the details, but essentially devolves from there. We try to make another payment, but it was like a partial payment. And then it was just like, forget it. So we ended up getting the data back, and then I saw what data was in there. And I think that's like the misgivings here is like, unless it was absolutely critical, like don't pay the ransom. Even if it is critical, it's like, you shouldn't be in that situation, which we shouldn't have been in that situation either. Like we shouldn't have a development environment that has access to or credentials that should be able to reach into a production environment in any way. This is the fun of like acquiring companies is you really do have to go through everything in every scenario. And it does build at least like lessons learned. Now I know different ways and things to go through. I mean, this isn't even like a diligence thing as much as like an operations thing of like understanding as your team's developing, are they creating new credentials and having controls around those pieces? But I guess that's the short version of the story is don't pay the ransom, just move on. I think we would have more cash in our pocket, but even more so, we at the downside would just recreated those files. That's the reality is like they weren't important files. They were basically files like trial users would generate that didn't have any real meaning to them. And it was just stupid. So I think knowing what's in your buckets as well would help, but I don't know. I don't have any other reflections. Do you?
And my favorite part that you left out was they're asking for some amount of Bitcoin. And I was like, can we just negotiate? Can we ask for, give them less? And they're like, we don't negotiate. We're not your friend. That was my favorite response to theirs.
Yeah. Well, they were my friend. They were very helpful and like, they had an extensive tech support, right? Like that seemed to be, and so I'm like trying to work through, okay, what's going to happen when I pay you? and how am I going to transfer this? And I wanted to know the details. So I wanted to like validate, like, is this person even like savvy enough, or are they just deleting these files and just trying, am I going to get extorted and extorted? So, but it's, I think what everyone tells you is like, just don't deal with it. Don't do it. I mean, it's happening more and more. You'll see hospital systems getting ransomed. I believe the city of Cleveland just recently got all their shit ransomed.
Yeah.
And
The hospital ones are a mess. This has been happening a bunch, and then we're in some like doctor group chats and they just basically operate off their phones and
yeah.
try to do whatever they can in like paper and phone calls. But yeah, those are super old systems. If they get knocked out, it takes them like a month plus to get back up. Yeah, it's wild.
So it is that it definitely, that incident renewed sort of my focus on security on existing systems. That it's like we assume all these things, you go through diligence, you go through a certain process, but then the products change. Like you have teams working on them, and just having regular oversight and reviews, and frankly penetration testing, like trying to go in and hire someone to go in and try to maliciously break stuff or do card testing. I mean, we run into it with, it's happened with Scout, where people were sending emails and we didn't even know you could, there were parts to that system because they weren't exposed, right? And so slapping captchas on new things, it happens. And these things do have, I guess this is better yet, like less a legal thing and more of a security refocus of like, hey, these things have very real costs. Somebody's going to send 100,000 emails to your SendGrid account. They're going to charge you. And so building these controls has been important, and it unfortunately doesn't affect MRR, right? It's like, I want to be focusing on MRR. I want to be focusing on growth. But after that, it's been spending time on making sure we're not going to be hemorrhaging money because, our servers are getting due to some malicious person testing credit cards for hours and hours on end. And by the way, like no software system is really like impervious to this.
Yeah. So all in all, a pretty straightforward, easy drug deal. You give them the money,
Yeah.
they give you the data back, and it was all fine. Although lesson learned, you should
Very
get paid for it.
slowly. I thought that
Yeah.
was sort of the kicker. It's like, I'm going to give you the drugs, but I'm going to give you, I don't know what drug we're going to use. Let's use heroin. I'm going to give you a tiny bag, even though you bought a big bag.
Yeah, the rest
Just
is being
just
walked over to you from 1,000 miles away.
yeah, I'm going through the DTs while I'm waiting for my drugs that I already paid for. So yeah, don't pay the ransom. There's just more hooks that they'll use to get out of you, and just move on. I mean, I think that would have been the wise thing to do. Just say, fuck it. Like, these files are gone. Nobody missed them. Not a single person was, even after they were restored. I've been watching them. Nobody's accessed them. These were like stupid. So don't do it.
Cool. Anything else? Any other updates you want to say before we sign off?
No, nothing on my end. Just keeping an eye on my logs and making sure that security's on point.
Yeah. It's all easy. You buy a business and you add sales and marketing and it just goes up. No
Yep,
problems.
exactly.
Well, cool. That's all I got then.
Cool. Thanks for listening.
Take care.